They say comparison is the thief of joy, but is it really? It depends how you see it. So let me give you an example. Comparison is what makes you evolve, is what makes you grow, is what makes you achieve great things, if you ask me. I mean, obviously, there's always exceptions, there's just ways to go about it. For example, if there was a guy making millions, but he was surrounded with guys making 10 millions, um, then he would feel like shit, obviously, right? So he had the drive and just the push to actually keep growing and make more money. Obviously, money isn't everything. I'm just giving an example. Everything isn't materialistic, but obviously, let's say his goal was to make tens of millions, and he was struggling. Then, if he just puts himself in a surrounding, an environment where people are making 10 millions around him, he'll feel like shit. He'll catch up how they work, the way they think, the way they operate, all of that. So yeah, he could be making a million and feel like shit, even though literally makes a million, what, top 1% maybe. Um, while some African kid in Africa is starving, barely a supply of water, and the kids are just happy, just because they have no comparison. They don't know anything outside of their little own world, their little bubble, right? So they got nothing to compare. It's pretty much standard. It's the norm for them. So everything they do is normal. Um, so them not drinking much, them not eating much is pretty standard, right? So you get my point. So one's happy, one's not. Even though one's making millions, he's free. He can do what he wants. He can get the best quality foods, provide for his family, do whatever he wants, travel, literally anything. Name it, he could do it. But there's one African kid, for example, is just arrogant. African tribe, as an example, it can be anything. They're, you know, pretty happy. Pretty much, they're not aware of anything outside their bubble. They're not aware there's something great out there, there's something better, and there's something more to strive for. Pretty much their belief of what the ceiling is, gets shattered. So the ceiling, for example, let's say you're surrounded with people that make 10K a month, maybe. That's probably your ceilings. So you think you can't really get past 10K, maybe 15K, and you go back down to 10K. But once you hang around with people making millions, then your ceiling shatters to the ceiling, so the top level where you can reach, I guess, if you could say that, jumps to, like, let's say 100K or a million, and then at your lowest before maybe 5K or zero is 10K now. So your ceiling switches to your base standard, right? So 10K was a lot before to you. Now 10K is the base standard. If you're making lower than that, you're probably gonna shit yourself and get thinking, your brain's gonna flag, thinking what's going on, there's something wrong. Anyways, so 10K becomes the low standard, and the ceiling just boosts up to millions, right? So now you could say the limited belief, your perception, your awareness just completely changed. Everything, your whole paradigm just changed in an instant. Yeah, so most people are comfortable and they don't have an environment that's bigger than themselves. When you do have an environment bigger than yourself, you just automatically have more pain, I guess you could say, just because the comparison that you're not where you should be or where you want to be, or you get my point. Don't take this too far, where people get so lost in comparison that they don't enjoy the moment. There's no gratitude, there's none of that. I'm not saying that. I'm saying to obviously do that just because how reality works. Your thoughts create everything. But you want to have a blend between the two. Think positively, all of that, but also surround yourself with big guys. So your vibe, I guess, your frequency, your just the way you see things changes. So you start to act differently, you start to work differently, you start to think differently, which obviously ends up growing you as a person. Includes your business, your family, your mental aspect, your physicality, all of that pretty much improves. The whole purpose of the environment is to not become complacent. How can you become complacent when every time you wake up, everything you do, when you walk, you talk? For example, let's say you go to Dubai, you see money around you, you see rich people, all of that. Just everything just reminds you of it, and then you, in comparison, for example, if you're broke and you go to Dubai, you in comparison would feel like shit. Or something along those lines, some kind of emotion that would just push you and drive you at the least, unless you're just built like a fag, if I'm allowed to say that, then you might just become submissive and just take the beating, I guess you could say, and cry about it instead of actually doing something. But yeah, you get my point. The whole purpose is to not be complacent. For example, my scenario where I live, shit part of the UK, I would say it's the poor part at least. The people around me are all poor, obviously, pay to paycheck, all of that. most of my debt, just an average. But the issue is when it comes to my side, I think is, I guess you could say, it made me an outcast, made me different to just everyone around me and just the family. Is, for example, my uncles, all of that. The family is, we're poor, for example, but they've got money. They're pretty much middle class. So they make much more than us, just as a family in general. So that aspect just there is, the comparison. Where for example, let's say I was just hung around all my family members or wherever I live, people all making roughly the same paycheck in debt. That might become the norm, the standard. I won't think much of it. Live my life happily. You get what I'm trying to say? But the fact that I should say I mean, we are all, just as family in general, just raised up as the poorest is what drives you, I guess, to do things differently. Because you could work a 9 to 5, but that's not. If I was to work a 9 to 5, for example, I mean, I could make maybe 20K, 30K, 40, even 100K, 200K a year, but there's a cap to it, right? I'd be pretty much in the same boat as them, middle class. But that's not what I want. Obviously, you want to outcompete everyone in a good way, friendly competition, especially when it comes to friends. But in this scenario, we're the poorest, and the goal is to be the richest. Not just by a bit, we're talking 10, 100x plus by miles. So that's the goal, that's the comparison that started it off. And obviously, once I literally am the richest in the family, I gotta jump to a different environment just because I might end up complacent. Um, Not just me, I mean, like, my family in general, but yeah, you get my point. Change the environment so you're not complacent. Once I'm the richest in the whole family in general, beating my uncles, all of that. That's been in the 9 to 5 industry for decades. But yeah, pretty much beat them, and then from there level up, go into a bigger room. You could say people making more than you. Now you feel like shit. The cycle repeats. I mean, if you feel like shit, if you see it that way, but you shouldn't really see it like that. You should see it like a competition, like a drive, and just to show you in perspective how great, how what greatness you could actually achieve, if that makes sense, without sounding cliche. Shit. By the way, this applies to literally anything. I'm just using money example. It could be mental aspect, even school, for example, another easy one. But for example, if you're stupid, no, well, not stupid. School is just trash in a way. It doesn't dictate if you're stupid. But if you got low grades and you hang around with people with high grades, then obviously there's gonna be a huge friction. And like they say, you usually go back to the mean, so the average balance out. So if the people you hang around with are, let's say there's like a graph, a line here. This is the average, right? If the people around you are up here, you're at the bottom, so you're not even an average. You're more likely just to regress back to the mean, to the average, to the center, and then from there you can obviously continue up, stay at the same level, and then that top level drops to the standard average, and now you have another ceiling. But yeah, school is a good example, but loads of you don't give a shit about school. Let's be real. So you don't have an attachment to it. There's no personal attachment. There's no drive. So regardless, for some of you, even if you got low grade and you hang around with high grades, it's not doing much because there's no emotion involved in that comparison and that environment shift. If that makes sense. So the whole point is emotions, because emotions is the language of God, universe, whatever you want to call it. No matter religion, no matter creature, animal, human, you know, God can understand you just based on emotion. That's the language. Pretty much there should be an attachment or interest or a care on the thing. And then from there, that's where emotions actually arise. And then, you go from there. Example, just real quick, me being in Bali just changed everything. Um, like, for example, this channel, the last time I posted consistently is when I was in Vietnam. So traveling abroad just by myself at the time. So it's just, I guess, me, myself, and my thoughts. So I had more things to do, I guess, less distractions. But yeah, that was the only time. Just an example, my environment shifted, everything changed. I was consistent with just YouTube, an example, but work also. Same thing again, Bali, back again, consistent. Just created 3 videos just now, just sitting there. Um, but yeah, now I'm gonna just watch a few videos, then related to work, obviously, and then obviously get to work.